Okay, we're live. Okay, good evening, good morning. Caroline Henry here from Champagne. Today, I am very lucky to be talking to Joel Butler MW, and we will talk about all things economical. Let's put it that way, Champagne. So, Joel, let's tell me a little bit more about yourself, because by emailing you, I actually don't know you.
Well, it's nice to see you sort of live, Caroline. Nice
Yes.
to meet you, quote unquote, formally. So yes, I'm here in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it is good morning to everybody joining from my end anyway. I'm in my La Cave, my office down in our basement, but so you'll notice it's a bit cluttered, but just this is where I hang out a lot. So I don't know what else to say. Let's see. Let me start. So I've been in the wine business since 1972. My first trip to Champagne, as well as most other places. So
in
I've been
72, first trip to Champagne.
72. Well,
Wow.
Champagne, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Germany, Italy. And Italy. Not the first time to Italy. I've been there. I've been in Italy for school in 69 and 70. Anyway, so I've been in the wine business since then, 54 years or whatever, in pretty much all capacities, from retail to wholesale to distributing to writing since 77 and teaching and doing a lot of wine education stuff over the years for various folks. I was the first MW, well, one of the first two resident MWs in 1990 with my good friend Tim Hanai. Some of your listeners might be familiar with. So we gallivanted through London to do the exam, not knowing, having a clue as to what to do, because there was no training back then. It was just show up and hopefully somebody will explain this craziness to you. But anyway, we managed to pass.
You managed to pass it. And
Yeah.
And so you, from talking to you, obviously, because I generally write only about Champagne or mostly about Champagne, you are quite interested in Champagne. How have you seen Champagne change, over the 50 years since 72? That's 50, more than 50 years. Yes.
Yeah, it's a long time. Well, I would say that the biggest change has been the proliferation of grower champagnes and stuff. When I first went to Champagne in the 70s, and then even subsequently up through later visits in even the mid 90s, I was mostly visiting, tasting with, the Grand Mark. I had good friends. Christian Paul Roger, the late Christian Paul Roger, was a very good friend. And so going to places like that was fun. But the small growers, other than a couple, like Gimonet, were really not on the radar. So that's been the biggest excitement I've seen. And the most interesting thing is being able to kind of see how Champenoise have taken back their land, so to speak, at the same time that the Grand Mark continued to thrive. So, in the bigger picture, because they're still the dominant force. We all know that. But yeah, the quality, I think, is certainly up. There's more good champagne, but that's also a factor of just the proliferation of conscientious growers learning how to make wine, the kids coming back. I think a lot of it has to do with generational change. I mean, the people that I first met, the Christian Paul Rogers of the world, or the Remy Krug, or whomever, they're my age, or maybe slightly younger. And so there's just a world of difference in the way people approach champagne, I think, today. And there's also been so much more knowledge gained through the various programs at the university. And I think people understand lots of the processes making sparkling wine, which goes true for everywhere, including the United States or Australia.
So, it's interesting you say that what you saw change the most is quality. And that's what people tell me very often, that champagne never tasted as good as it tastes today. Um, Anyone reading my Substacks will know that I don't necessarily agree with this. I think, yes, there's excellent champagne out there, like you say. The Grand Marque have done a lot of work, and so have, I would say about 100, 120 growers that are really excellent. But the rest, and I think you guys probably don't necessarily get it. But like for instance, here in my village, when we have, I don't know, the New Year's wishes or any of those things, it's very dangerous to drink champagne because it really doesn't taste
Well,
that well.
I should have caveated what I said. The one thing that is, I think, less good now, and it has to do over the last 20, 30 years of production, is that with the proliferation of producers and the raising of yield levels to some degree, there is also a lot of mediocre champagne that I hate to say it, but clearly goes into a lot of BOBs, maybe more in Europe than here. We've been fortunate that BOBs that come out, as I pointed out in some of my Substack reviews, like Costco's,
Mhm.
the quality is pretty good, but there is the caveat to that is that because there is so much, I think a lot of people don't age the wines long enough, and I think that is detrimental to the quality. At the same time, the positive side, and maybe this is a um, sideways type of thing, that the general level of dosage has dropped. And I think
Mhm.
that's to people's tastes more, and it's also a reflection of perhaps, obviously, climate change,
Yes.
having riper fruit to work with. But I think that's also constrained the quality of the wines because we're losing out on some of the more subtle things that happens with higher dosage wines if they're properly made and aged long enough. And I think that's been lost because there's the compelling economic reasons to get
Well,
stuff out faster for the lower priced wines. I mean, a 12-pound or I mean, in Washington, where I live, which has very high local taxes as well as just the generic now Trumpian tax problems. Um, but even in California, you really cannot find champagne, a non-vintage brut, for under $30 practically, and that would be exceptionally low.
yes.
Other
That
than a BOB like Costco, or I don't know what Sam's does because I don't have them. But I mean,
yeah.
it's the equivalent of Lidl or
Yeah,
Sainsbury's in the
I
UK,
know.
or Leclerc in France.
Yeah. Well, Costco. We actually have Costco in
Oh,
France,
I know.
but
And
but
actually, let's go in France.
yeah. No, I've never been to the Costco in France, but my brother lives in the US, and I used to sell New Zealand wine, so we sold into Costco's and into Sam's in Chicago. I've been uh, to the big stores, but $30 is actually really quite cheap, which in a
It's
way,
almost impossible now.
yeah, or even 35, because I was surprised to hear that. I thought it would be higher. But then when I had the chat with Don Kavanagh, my editor at Wine Searcher, he actually said that the pricing hadn't changed that much. And I calculated it afterwards, and it was about 25% in 15 years or something. So it really wasn't as extreme as we thought here, where, you know,
Yes, I
uh,
think
the
probably he's
glut, so
done
called,
massive
comes
growth.
from the pricing, is what, is what they are saying.
Yeah, I think perhaps on the overall long arch, but the difference is that the prices, in actual fact, have gone up quite a bit. I think because the purchasing power has not gone up at the same level.
Yeah.
And when I look at prices, I do some price comparisons to kind of have
Hmm.
something to talk about with you. And using Wine Searcher or something, when I go in and you look at the price, the average price, and then the range of prices for champagnes, Grand
Hmm.
Marque or whatever. I mean, it's insane compared to what people actually make and can afford to buy. And there's virtually no champagnes of the ones I just did a random search, and there's nothing under $50. Well,
Mhm.
you can't call champagne a everyday drink, not that you ever could really, but 20, 30 years ago, I could still buy, or even 10 years ago, we could
Yeah.
still buy a decent multi or non-vintage champagne on a reasonable, salary. Anymore, I don't think possible.
Well, I one of the things I noticed when I went to the US, like I said, I have a brother living in the US, so I've go regularly. Well, not so much at the moment. So,
Does he live on the East Coast?
pardon me. He lives
Does-
in Cleveland.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so East Coast. Um, but I've been a little bit all over because I've got friends and stuff. Um, but being an outspoken person, I think at the moment is maybe not the best time to go to the United States.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's a different discussion. So
you never
um,
know. They might not even let you in.
oh, I fear that maybe I won't be able to get in. So um, therefore, basically, I'm staying here. But one of the things I noticed, which for me was very shocking, because when I sold New Zealand wine, obviously the wine was it was a little bit more expensive in the US, but it was almost the same price, in
Yeah.
dollars. I know the New Zealand dollar was worth less, but it was almost the same price as it was in New Zealand. There were obviously big differences. I think the biggest difference I saw when I was doing the rounds was New York, New Jersey, where you could buy the bottle in the shop cheaper than it was sold, wholesale in New York. And I was like, how does that work? We send it in the same container, basically. But that was just one of the things. But what I noticed with champagne was that the Grand Marque were cheaper on average than the growers, because I wrote a book to people that were in my book. There was nothing under last time, when I was promoting it, actually. It's not the last time I went, but it was in 19, around 19, and then just after COVID. Um, there was nothing under 80 or $100. And these bottles here were like 50 euros or 45 euros. So today, all these wines have gone up after the COVID. So obviously, I think have, it will have increased even more in the US for those things. But interestingly, those people continue to sell. So it
You didn't
seems that
talk.
no, well, the Grand Marque in a way, but I'm talking about these growers that that work more ecological, the ones that were in my book. So I said I was really shocked to see, for instance, I'll give an example. Thomas Barbichon was in the Aube, who's biodynamic. He makes great wines, but it's not at that time. Now it's a bit more expensive, but at that time, it wasn't more than 35, 32, 35 euros for one of his bottles, and they were really good. I remember buying some for events on the East Coast, and they were like 78, $88 before tax. So then tax came on top. And then when I was on the West Coast, it was even, well, in San Francisco, it was even higher. So I was like, whoa, this is crazy. But then there were some that were cheaper, because I know it's also the three-tier system. If you
Yeah.
bring it in directly, if you buy it from somebody else, I noticed. But to me, this was quite shocking because at that time when I was traveling, most Grand Marque were between $40 and $50.
Well,
So,
that's yes, and to all those points. Well, I would say, well, firstly, the three-tier system is unfortunately alive and well, and that's just the way things are. So whatever the price is, I've always looked at it. Almost doesn't matter what kind of wine it is, champagne or
Mhm,
otherwise. But I mean, in general, if you take the price at the domain or at the cave
mhm,
in euro, the retail price to
yeah,
the consumer, that
To the
typically
consumer.
is the FOB price to a wholesale importer in the US. So that's why part of the problem is that you're buying wines at retail in the country of origin, and that ends up then being multiplied 2 times at least by our stupid
It's
pricing system here. That said, I did some quick checks on pricing now for champagne to kind of answer your questions, or
mhm.
to at least get to that point. Is Yeah, I mean, prices in some ways are consistent with what they were, except the base price has gone up. So, for example, I mean, I'll just take an example: Veuve Clicquot, yellow label, but
Mhm.
kind of classic. I mean, the average price now in the States is around 70, but you can find it for as low as $48 to $130.
Okay.
Or Bali special cuvee, 55 to $100. Well, these are huge price differences.
Yes.
And it has to do with some of that has to do now with when people bought. So some of that reflects 15% more on top of whatever we had already.
Yes.
But it also reflects different um, marketing strategies, and the fact that with some of the grand marks, they get their wholesaler distributor to, do post offs and or promotions. Whereas the small growers, like, somebody like Don't Grellet or Tarlon,
Yes.
just comparing Brut to Brut, extra Brut maybe, the average prices are in the 60s or high 50s, and the spread can be wide between, the low and the high. Like Tarlon, I noticed, was 55 on the low and $80 on the high, but
Okay.
Don't
So
Pay
is
is very close. So the thing is, though, the average price is higher than, say, Grand Mark, and a lot of that, I think, has
yeah.
to do with the marketing side of it, and the fact that the quantities are greater, so there's more incentive for the people.
A
But
lot of
it's
the
still expensive. I mean, $50 minimum is just, it's kinda crazy.
yeah, I know, but like the Grand Marque, at a lot of them they actually have their own distribution system, or they have connections. But it's
Well,
interesting what you
you
say about Talon, because I've been good friends with the family for a long time, and
I'm sorry, with whom?
Talon,
Oh,
Talon.
yeah, good
So
call.
I met Melanie, like, oh gosh, 2010, ages ago. And not long afterwards, I wasn't living in Champagne at that time, but not long afterwards, I went to New York and I found her champagne there. I was living in the Netherlands, they didn't have it there. And I bought it, and I remember it was at that time $75. So that was 2010. Okay. So it's the zero. I think it's the same one, because their entry level one is the
Right.
zero dosage. So that actually means that the price hasn't moved that much,
No,
if you see what I'm saying,
our
which
ability
is,
to pay for it has gone
yes,
down. And
I think, I think that's maybe, you know, um, part of it. And I also don't think, you said that the people will sell FOB what they sell at the Salador, the wine. Like if we take back the Taron, it's around 40-45 euros. So they don't sell much Salador, actually. They don't, they go through a distribution system. So obviously that is not necessarily the case. But what a lot of people do is they give the same price as they give to the French distributor, and often that distributor is a wine shop. So, you cut everybody out. So I think that is where the issues come. I remember in New Zealand when I was selling wine, I had the distributor price for Auckland, and then I aligned the prices. Normally to the US, our price was lower than that, so that we made sure that the final price of the wine was around 20-25 dollars, no matter where we were, if you want to see that. And I think this is something I noticed when I first came here. This is not done in Champagne. And I think also the Grand Marque, obviously they did this, but the growers didn't necessarily do it. They're starting, the bigger growers, Tarlon, Mousset, Geoffroy, people that have some land and that have some volume, and that have national distribution as well, because obviously all of that goes hand in hand. Gimonet, like you said, they have now aligned their prices differently, but it costs. Um, if you think for a Grand Marque, when they buy the grapes and they do everything, it will cost them, I think, depending on the year, between 15 and 20 euros by the time the wine leaves here, with the marketing budget and for the Grand Marque.
Which
So,
goes to a question. Well, which goes to some things that you had sent me to some things that report. I can't remember who it was from, but anyway, it showcased
oh yeah, yeah,
average
the
in euros per kilo. So I started playing with that, and one of the things that's gone up, and I think obviously they feel the same way. The costs of making champagne or any sparkling wine, that could matter anything in wine, has significantly gone up.
yeah,
But one of the biggest things, of course, is the cost of fruit. So when I looked at what that showed me from what you'd said, and there was, I think it was an average price of €5 per kilo in
no, it's more.
champagne.
It's
Sorry,
more. The numbers you got is the profit. The average price for grapes per kilo in
it's
Champagne
six
is
or
is around €7.
seven. Okay,
Uh,
so what that
so
equates to is about $6,000 a ton US.
yeah,
And so I was looking at it, which is, but that it's been in that range now, at least for high crew levels for quite some time. But
oh, but high
so
cru levels is more expensive. Grand Cru, if you have Grand Cru, you pay €10. If you
yeah.
have organic grapes, goes up to
So
€15 a kilo.
compared to that, so I was looking at costs for grapes because we, at least in California, we have a way to sort of approximate the average cost of Pinot and
Mhm,
Chardonnay across the various appellations where that stuff is sourced. I was looking at it, and one of the reasons why I think people are moving away from champagne because it's just out of control price wise to most people, and moving into champagne like producers like Rotor or Brut, for example.
mhm,
And looking at the price of Rotor and Rotor or Brut online is interesting. But part of the reason is that it's still for example, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in the two main places where fruit for Rotor or estate comes from, which is Mendocino and then Sonoma for the most part. The average price, there's a spread from a moderate to very, very high for those grapes. And clearly it has to do with what that fruit is for. But
mhm,
knowing how things work here, I looked at the tonnage levels for various different
mhm,
points, and where you see, high tonnage, that's probably sparkling wine fruit because most of those ranches are for that purpose. And so the average, Chardonnay, like in Mendocino for sparkling is around maybe $1,100 a ton, and Pinot, closer to 3,000. And in Sonoma, which is the other main part for that, you look at the price, and Pinot's close to $3,800 a ton, and Chardonnay is about $2,600. Well, putting that in perspective with roughly 7,000 a ton
mhm.
for Champagne, and then extrapolating all the other costs, and the costs here are just as much, have gone up just as much almost,
Yeah.
you know, in relative proportion. So it's no wonder that, Clico, or I shouldn't say Clico, Rotor or Estate, people are going to maybe glom towards that because, quite honestly, it tastes pretty close to Rotor or Brit Premier Collection. But, looking at
It's
the
very
price,
good, actually.
Collection Brut, average price is like $22. And the average price of Rotor Collection, I'm looking at my notes here, give me a sec, is 72.
Mm, yeah,
Big difference,
72. I tell
72.
you. Whoa.
Now, they're not quite compatible, but having
No.
tasted them enough side by side, and it's always been one of the more fun MW exam questions is when they do sparkling wine and the blind part. They put in those two rotor
Yeah.
quartet, it's called, but in Europe and
Yeah.
UK versus rotor collection or premier, then and going through the whole thing, and it's not so easy to determine the difference. But qualitatively, they're very close price wise. There's a completely different
No,
set of things
you
going
know,
on, and that's where the disconnect for me has
yes.
gone on in the last 5 8 years. Is that champagne is priced itself to a level that
That I think the
justify.
the prices for grapes started going down last year. So this
Yeah,
was the first, but it's definitely not a loss. So they will continue to fall. Um, you know, it's interesting that Chardonnay is cheaper than Pinot Noir in America
it's
because here it's more expensive.
that's just
Um, generally, it's more expensive. And I think also when you compare, for instance, those two cuvées from Roederer, here, even though they are trying to get their growers with them on the more ecological path, like quite a lot of houses have been
they're very
doing,
good about that.
uh, a lot of them are very reluctant,
Yeah,
you know, very reluctant. And it's not easy to get out of the grape contracts. Now, I know they refuse grapes. You can refuse grapes. Rodra's one of the few houses, there really aren't very many, but is one of the few houses that checks. And especially in difficult years, now most people start to check, but they always check. So they can refuse when, the standard is not there if it's faulty. But the thing is, those, you know, in difficult years like, 23, when there was a lot of rot, or 17, everybody refused grapes and there were no grapes left. So those grapes went somewhere, if you see what I'm saying. So, and I've seen, like in press centers, I have seen grapes change brand depending on who comes to look at the grapes. Okay, when you stand there long enough, you see, it's easy to put a paper up somewhere. So,
yeah. I think that the issue, yes, and that is
and
part of the issue, is the quality of
and
the grapes coming in, and at the same time, though, if I am surprised that prices are slightly coming down, only because when they lowered the plafond to 9,000 kilos. I mean, what's going to happen in Champagne if that continues?
it will
You
continue.
the growers and producers, the Grand Mark, would say, "Yeah, well, if we can't harvest more, we're going to have to raise the prices on what we have."
The I think basically from what David Chatillon said, who is the president of the UMC, the Union des Maisons de Champagne, and the co-president of the CIVC, he said there is no room for the prices to come down, or very little room, because the margins are very small. And that is several reasons why the margins are very, very small. The first one is that the grape prices have been pushed up because so-called the appellation was full after 2007. So what happened is the prices went up, like doubled almost, if you look over the 15 years, which but the quality didn't go up, and there was a lot of, there were the yields were high. So what we've seen, for instance, if you see really cheap wines, like I was telling you before we came on, that in the UK supermarkets have been selling champagne at £12. So when you see champagne sold at £12, this is, your Costco champagne, as you say. So this could be Sainsbury, Asda, I don't know, Tesco, but this probably comes from, somebody that needs cash. So they will shift um, um, vin sur latte, they call it, so that champagne's version of bulk, and that will then be sold. Now, we saw a lot of this when I was still working in New Zealand. Actually, there was a bit of a glut at that time in champagne as well, towards the I don't know, beginning of after the millennial, bang, and and people were selling, because I remember they were selling them in our New Zealand stand. We weren't very happy about that at the time. So I think what you're seeing is houses are now bringing prices down. And I think the biggest example, because before people weren't refusing grapes because they were too scared of losing the contracts, and they were upping the price to keep up with LVMH. LVMH is the one that dropped the price. So others
Well,
have followed. They did the same in cognac. They did the same in cognac, in the 90s, basically. And
well,
I
I
think
think
they're going to do the same here because they have a lot of stock. And the sales are not about to go up because January sales are not looking good. The French sales continue to tumble. European sales have been down for a while. And now international sales as well. So the champagne model that everybody was going on about was, they created themselves because it wasn't traditionally like this. But, for the last 20 years, it's been going at least on a system of 10,000 kilograms per hectare with a higher price. So now basically what's happening is the yields are coming down and the prices are going to come down. So what you're going
yeah.
to see is you're going to have what you saw in cognac. You're going to have growers, people go under. And then in the beginning, I think that uh, we will not necessarily, you know, I don't think we'll get here where they're going to start pulling up vines like they've been doing in other places of France yet. But, I think it will be like it was in New Zealand when I left around 2009, 2010, where nothing much happened to the vineyards for a few years until the price of the land came down. Because, it takes a few years before the price of the land comes down. And then the land got bought up. So I think it will be a similar thing here that is happening. I think what they want to do is they want to have larger vines. The vignes semi-large is what they are pushing for several reasons. But also, if you have the vignes semi-large, you need less people to work. Because one of the reasons champagne is so expensive is that you need a lot of people, and it costs a lot to employ somebody in
Well, that's
France
that's true of everything.
because of the social
Or-
duties. It costs.
Yeah,
So,
but I think so. But speaking in terms, well, several things you said, I would agree. I would the other things I would say though is, I mean, you said where is those grapes going? Well, they clearly a lot of them have gone to the co-ops because that's where all these BOBs are mostly coming from. In fact, I just noticed I was at Costco the other day, and the Costco champagne, which is selected by a very good friend who is also an MW. He's been doing their champagnes for years. The price used was up until Trump's tariffs, just under $20, which is
wow.
pretty good. But it was coming from Janison, and then he switched suppliers, and it's now, gosh, I'm forgetting the name. It's a different producer who I think is better, a better co-op.
But
So,
Janisson was not a co-op. It was a grower, but the
well,
family
sorry,
split up.
but kind of important. Anyway, the long story short is the price. He tried to keep it at 20, but now it's 23 because,
Mhm.
well, 15% tariffs and all that. It is better quality, but the fact is that um, just like here, as long as the sparkling wine is mostly made, at least method champenoise traditionnel, it has to be made from hand harvested whole bunches.
Mhm.
That part can't be changed, and yet at the same time, the costs here are relatively high for doing that, but nothing like champagne.
Uh-huh.
Um, and partly that's because we have access to a much larger labor force, some of which may or may not be quite kosher, but that's the way our economy works. The fact is, in the United States, if we didn't have illegal labor, this country's economy, at least agricultural economy, would probably collapse because
Yeah.
it's just the way things are. But to get back to the issue of the yields, I mean,
Uh-huh.
I think that that's going to be a big factor in how things play out. But uh, the growers, I think, can maintain it. Whether the Grand Mark, particularly LVMH, as you said, they're coming down in other costs, but I suspect they're having to bite the bullet profit-wise to do so because
To drop
there's
the
so
price, you mean? The price of
yeah,
grapes?
if they have if they to drop the price at the other end, of the export price. Um,
But I think that they're going to look, but one of the big signals we saw here, and we've seen this for the last 2 years, but especially last year, is before, if somebody refused your grapes, or a lot of people actually don't have contracts, even though they want contracts, they're selling on the spot market. So LVMH stopped buying completely on the stock market. So that basically means you don't know what to do with the juice. So, obviously they need to do things. The contracts are 5 years, so they will be renegotiated in 28 for 29, and they will put a lot of conditions on there. If almost every Grand Marque that I spoke to is investing in regenerative viticulture. The CIVC is going to put regenerative viticulture, guidelines and requirements in their certification. So Viticulture Durable en Champagne, VDC. But they are, so that basically means that there's no point that the houses do this if all the fruit they bring in, which is the bulk of what they get, are not doing this. So I think that I wrote a piece like in 2020, actually, just before COVID, it was printed, where I was saying that LVMH could very much do with champagne what they did in cognac. Okay, and I said they had Grand Champagne and Petit Champagne in cognac, and now they have champagne as a whole. Um, and I said the only thing they need is a crisis. So COVID came, and I think they didn't do it at COVID because all all their money was tied up everywhere else and nothing was shifting anymore. But now we have another crisis, and you can see their sales have dropped 2 years in a row quite significantly. It's difficult to see whether they are just champagne sales, because cognac has been suffering heavily as well, and you can't see that from the figures.
well, don't
But
they also have surplus? I mean, stockage is high
and
across the board.
they have a lot of stock,
Yeah,
and
everybody
and
does.
they have been,
And
you
at the
know
same time, how the only way they can move it is to reduce prices because, and yet
but
we're
but I
reluctant
think,
to do so, and I think people are reluctant to do so here, and this has caused the problem that we see, at least from my
that, you know,
perspective, in the new world is in America, that we're not seeing any serious uh, drops in prices, even for the holiday pricing. And some of what I, was reading to you before reflects. I was just looking at some of the pricing I saw for some wines. Holiday pricing was up significantly over the previous year or two with people who I've looked at going to various tastings and seeing the comparative pricing from one year to the next.
yes.
And it's all been up and it's not down. Whereas with to a lesser degree, that's true in domestic things like Rotor Brut or Argyle, where pricing has kind of stayed more or less the same. Or even one from, like, you're from New Zealand, right?
No, actually, I lived in New Zealand for a while.
So there's
I grew up in South Africa, so
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, it's harder for me to see Cap Classique here because we don't get all that many. But
yeah,
the New Zealand fizz, we see
has
Jan's
very good fizz.
very
Yes.
good, and they're good. And the price of Jan's, I used to sell it at our store 3 years ago, the Brook, for $23, $24. I think now it's crept up to about 27 or 28 for the equivalent wine in most places. But in terms of cost of production and stuff, champagne just seems to be pushing an extreme that um, they something's got to give. If not, then they're going to continue to sell off stuff. The co-ops will maybe, or companies like Genason are going to take advantage of it. Um,
But
But the quality of the fruit, and this is the thing I remember, you probably do too. I mean, I remember when the 2011 champagnes came out. And 2011 was pretty horrible because of Suzuki mainly. And, but a lot of that fruit went through and you still got,
it was
bottles and
Greyhound
juice.
11. We
Yeah,
didn't get the Suzuki till 14. That's the first time we saw it, the Suzuki in
but I
14.
think there were some people who did have it, and maybe I'm not so sure. And anyway, but 14 for sure. But 14, on the other hand, is a vintage. But if they came in 14, 13,
But
then yeah,
if you just have sour rot, according to the analogs, it falls through. But if you have sour rot combined with grey rot, or you have
yeah,
grey rot,
yeah,
that's
you
where
have
we have
problems.
problems. So
And
we
I
had
then, and yet a lot of that stuff got through, and
it got through 11, 17. 17 was there's some very great wines made in 17, but the fruit turned in front of your eyes like it did in 11. And 23 was a lot of rot as well. Very
that's why
few.
I wonder whether or not, if the CIBC or whomever it is that says, okay, we're going to make sure everybody is regenerative by whatever. I,
Oh
first
no,
of all,
they're
uh,
not saying that everybody's going to be regenerative. They're including it into their
yes,
certification.
how many people will do so? That's another story. But that has an effect on quality, of course, at the
Mhm.
same time that I think that's probably not going to happen for a lot of growers, at least initially. The big houses maybe can afford to do it, and certainly Rotor and even Moet has made progress towards,
Moet has
yeah,
been, they organize the World Living Soil Forum, so they've been in it. Rudra obviously farms organic, most of their vineyards biodynamic, a big part of them Telmont certified, and they certified regenerative organic certified, so ROC. But the thing basically is, I think what we're going to see in Champagne is what what happened in Cognac, where this huge bulk of growers shrunk over a decade. In Cognac, they went from something like, I can't remember, 60,000 to 20,000, where, the land gets taken up by different people. And it's then managed differently because the people that do not want to um, move forward, and there are quite a few, I live in the middle of it, so I see too much maybe. Um, they're going to struggle.
yes,
The and I think that is, and those wines that you say, those BOB wines, they are the bulk wines, Champagne's bulk wines, so vin sur lettre. But this used to be a strategy from cooperatives that they kept some bottles because, they had enough money from the grapes or whatever, so they kept them so that they could sell them when they needed cash. They used this as a cash flow mechanism. And so the houses like 17, I think it was 17, 18, it was the same, the sales were stuck. They wanted to stop the vassal, this they didn't want people to sell them anymore, and so there was a big thing that didn't go through. But I think obviously as people go under and as more and more growers, because that's one of the things that happened as well, more and more growers that made bottles stopped to make bottles and sold their grapes.
yes,
And when that happens, they have stock. So that stock they just want to shift so that basically they get payout because the longer they sit on the stock, the more it costs basically. But at one point, that's going to dry up. If you see what I'm saying, that is not, that
yes.
is not a supply that will stay there forever.
And the counter, and actually, I was going to ask you the question, but just from the perspective that I've seen here, and according to some of the statistics I've seen, the one place where champagne prices or champagne has not gone down in sales is at the tête de cuvée highest levels, where
Mhm,
there's less elasticity
mhm.
in the market, and those have continued to do well, while the bottom, sort of, as you kind of alluded to, has fallen out. But I also think the other part that we haven't talked about, and perhaps it's relevant and it may
Mhm.
have influence on price, is, thinking about, well, if what's changed, if champagne's gone down, other sparkling wines have gone up,
Mhm.
amongst which Prosecco is the most obvious. And so it begs the question in my mind of how people's palates are changing and what they want in sparkling wine. And it would seem that, which goes back to what I had started off our conversation with, saying, the style of champagne has evolved over the last
Mhm.
50 years, drier, yada, yada. Um, and it may not be something that people actually really want so much of if one looks at what is now more in favor. And I don't know if that's true in terms of, uh, say, the French market or the UK market. When you look at, okay, what other sparkling wines of champagne style are out there? Well, what are more popular? Well, Cremant, amongst
Mhm.
others, whether it's Alsace, Burgundy, Loire, um, and those typically are sweeter, not always, but quite often.
They
And
you know,
so I just have to wonder whether or not part of what might change pricing in champagne has something to do with their competitive set, with particularly with the fact that a lot of people, especially younger drinkers, it seems, prefer something that's milder, for lack of
may
a better.
well, I actually think I would disagree with this because I think champagne has such a broad spectrum of wine. It's maybe five, well, maybe a bit more, 7 years ago. Um, they LVMH, both Clicquot and wet. And then afterwards, other houses followed suit. They had these sweet champagnes that you drank with all kinds of different ice cubes that you had to put, I don't know, cucumber, whatever, all kinds of things. You had to, there was a whole thing how to make the ice cubes that you then put in the wine, like a kind of spritz, if you want, in a different way. And then, so for Moet, it's called ice,
Yeah,
in a white bottle. So, they did those kind of things. I think, the
I
to be
wasn't
honest, the Cremant is not necessarily sweeter. I think what happened is traditionally Cremant was easier to ripen. And it's a different grape variety. For instance, if you have Cremant de Loire, you have at that moment Chenin, which is a different flavor
yeah,
profile. Burgundy obviously is similar to us, and the sparkling wine region, or where they make a lot of sparkling wine, comes, is very close to the border of Champagne. But then they use a lot of aligoté. We don't use aligoté, to make the sparkling wine. But I think just, the consumer has more choice. And I think the
well,
mistake,
that's it.
the consumer
But
has more choice and he has a specific budget. And I think what happens is people have bought champagne and they have not they've been underwhelmed. Let's put it this way. They've put €50 or $50, $60 into a product, and then they've been underwhelmed. And so, they've then bought something else and they said, oh, well, this actually is better. And it's only, I don't know, 22 or 25 or $30. So I think that is where some of the things go. And I think the reason why the top end isn't going down is because the quality has always been higher at the top end. And also, a lot of the growers that I said, for instance, we spoke about Talon before, they do single vineyard wines, which are
yes,
expensive, but they don't have enough of these single vineyard wines.
yes,
They age them for a long time and they are very sought after because they over deliver. For the price, they are good value. And I think that is where you need to go back to as well. Is it good value for what you pay? Do you believe that you got a deal? that, you can have a deal at $100 and you can have a deal at $10. That depends, basically.
That's
So,
true, except for still there's the ultimate point is can you afford to pay for it? But coming back to the other bit about dosage, yeah, I wasn't implying that the champagne laws, you know, go to the level of, like ice. But I think there's a difference. And I don't know if there's any studies out of Champagne that can speak to the degree that I'm going to say is that, heretofore where, if you go back 10 years, 12, 20 years or so, typical Brut dosage probably was closer to the maximum of the range,
oh,
15 grams, 12 grams, 11.
12, yeah.
Now you see so many more wines that are much drier, 6 grams, 7 grams.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's a sea change in Champagne and or a push by producers to move in a direction they think the market is, whereas in fact, I would argue that the market's actually going back to wanting slightly
Okay.
less sweet or slightly less dry, partly because it's not so much the sugar, but the textural
Mm.
roundness that you get from a champagne that's slightly higher dosage, otherwise equal, great quality, etc., does matter to people. And it's where they feel they get more bang for the buck in a certain sense, because there's more amplitude. And I don't know if that's factored into the equations and whether or not in the end that will matter. But I, I, I just suspect that's part of the underlying issue with champagne and sales and these things. You're right. As far as the top end wines, well, the quality is not really faded down at all. And the only problem I have with the high prices for grower champagnes is that it's like trying to compete. In a way, it's an uneven playing field between them and a Grand Marque. A Dom Perignon can make 1,000,000 bottles, get away with
More.
it, or more.
More than 1,000,000 bottles. Significantly more.
That's like Israel's real. Do they really
Yeah,
have?
yeah.
I've been to where they make them, but you'll never get an Israeli government official to admit it. They'll never admit how many bottles Dom Perignon is. But my point is that there's a difference there in how you market it, and to pay. Well, I mean, one can understand. Okay, there's $150 champagne that's 200 cases or something. It seems like it's a deal, but it's still $150. And I think that the kind of idea that a lot of grower champagnes have, and this is my complaint, I suppose, and it goes back to when Silas kind of started. There's this sort of Me Tooism that, well, if these guys can get it, I should be able to get it because I make less, it's better, yada, yada. And I just find that to be a little bit.
I think
And I'm not accusing people of actually doing, but it comes across to some folks that way.
I understand. I know people that, put in practice what you said. So I know you're right. At the other end, I think, the prices of cellulose went up that much because, all at once he became in demand and there was no supply because, like I have been there that I translated for Anselme that there's people from, I can't remember, Riga or somewhere that wanted, that are importers that want wines and, they get on the waiting list because
Yeah.
there isn't any. So in the capitalist market, supply and demand, if you have a lot of demand for little supply, the price goes up. I think some growers took this and they said, okay, I don't make much, therefore my price will go up. But they need to have the product that goes with it. Not everybody makes wine like Anselme Cellulose, and, that is aged the same way that, with all the care that goes in it. So therefore, I think that there is a spectrum, a vast spectrum, but there are people that make very good wine. And, it's expensive, but, they're selling it because they like it. But then there are people that literally, there's like, at the moment, what's become fashionable is these I don't know, 30, 35-year-olds that start buying grapes. So and they try to be like the little negotiants, and they want to make unicorn wine. So what they do is they buy grapes one time from one person, and they use iconic growers. Normally they use people that have established a
Sure.
name. And so then they make a wine which is actually not as good as the wine that the grower makes, or the established person makes, but they surf on it, and it's like a unicorn. And you can only have it on um
Allocation. Yes, very good.
allocation and all of those different things. But I believe that those people, they're starting to suffer today already, and I think that they will be pushed out of the market, because if you try to manipulate a saturated market, it's going to be very difficult if you don't have the quality to create that demand. I think it worked a little
Yeah.
bit, but
And I think to that point, there's another facet that I find of interest with regard to champagne, and the concept of these people striving to play wannabes. The fact is, if you're charging $200 a bottle in your Dom Perignon, and you're charging $200 a bottle if you're Pierre Peters,
Mhm,
are very different things, in the sense, to me, that I look at wine, having made wine for years, and understanding, great, especially grape costs, but the labor side of it too.
mm,
It's true here in the United States with sparkling wine producers making, their top end wine versus their quote non vintage wine.
mhm.
At Dom Perignon, I mean, most of the price that you're paying is marketing. It's sure
Yes.
as hell not production.
No, no,
Whereas,
no. It's
uh, because the costs of production are, given the volume, that much less than, say, somebody like Pierre Peters. So in that sense, $200 for Pierre Peters, in a way, is good value, assuming the quality as is that good. And if somebody like him, it is, I think. Um, but the, but the fact is that, from the point of view of consumers who've been taught to believe in branding, at least from our point of view here in the US, and I'd say in the UK too. Um, the fact is that, well, Jesus, why should I pay that much for this guy? I mean, I don't know anything about him. Whereas DP, it's DP, and
uh,
they don't
but
understand that actually DP is, and Dom Perignon is quite good. Don't get me wrong. I won't refuse it. Let's just say that. But I think from the point of view of how things work in the wine business, at a certain level, I'm very distrustful of marketing and PR costs, because I've been on that side of it too. And when the price of what it costs to make and the profit then put onto that cost is more factored by ancillary costs like marketing, which are non-productive. It's bullshit
mhm.
price, basically. Uh, then I kind of think, well, maybe, there's something askew that we should pay attention to from the consumer's perspective, that, you know, you can pay too much for two completely different wines of quality, and yet one of them, that that price is based more upon the actual production and not the ego or the marketing costs of the producer.
but
And
but
for me, that's a big issue, because at the same point, I mean, if you're spending $200 a bottle, you're still spending $200 a bottle. And if your income
yeah. But then
is
if you spend thousands on a bottle of Burgundy, it's even if it's produced biodynamic, and even if the
yeah,
yields are low,
yeah. Oh,
or
I agree. I just was on.
because
I
I
was in a Burgundy tasting, and I said almost the exact same thing to the producer who was there. For the most part, his prices are quite reasonable. But then there's this other one that's $400 a bottle, and I'm going, who do you? I just said, that's crazy. I mean, your price for that versus this. If your Premier Crew is 100 and this one's 400, there really isn't all that much difference in the real costs here. I'm sorry, there's not. It's
No,
all perception. It's all
it is
market.
it is a
But
it is a perception, and I think that what a lot of people forget, Dom Perignon was one of the first, Cristal I think was before that actually, but Moet was sitting on wine from the First World War that they hadn't sold, and
yeah,
Devoy came up with the idea of selling this vintage wine significantly more expensive to see what they could do with it. So that's how this came. And then, when they bought, um, I think it was Mercier that they bought, and Mercier had the name Dom Perignon. They said, okay, we'll put Dom Perignon on this thing. We make a beautiful story out of it. It has a beautiful bottle. So, I think that is also, for instance, when you look at I live in Mauvillers. A lot of the grapes in Dom Perignon come from Mauvillers. I have seen the press centers where the Dom Perignon is pressed, which is, I don't particularly want to elaborate on it, but, it reminded me of a laundromat, if you want, okay? It was like big production.
yeah,
Um, and then if you compare that, for instance, with we spoke about Roedre, if you compare with Cristal or Cristal Rosé, if you see all the work that goes in there, all the detail, I know it's expensive, but when you see all the things that they do compared to the others, there's still a big margin, profit margin. And these cuvées prestige often also subsidize part of the entry level because some of the marketing of the entry level is paid by the higher end cuvées as well. But I think when people want to buy, I think for Pierre Peters and for others, when you think, for instance, that people pay, I don't know, $3,000 or $2,000 to go to the Fête de Champagne to meet these different people, to bring their own expensive bottles to share at a dinner where they also paid $1,000 to go to the dinner, to snap selfies with the winemakers. At that moment in time, I think, there are different types of customers. And I think the customers that may be at the top end, which is also what we heard from Wine Searcher, where Don said people keep on searching for all the cuvée prestige. That's what we have the most. Dom Perignon was the most searched
yeah.
for. Um, so I think, you've got that, and then you've got other people that say, "Oh, I would like to drink champagne." And now they're going to say, "Well, do I really want to spend $60 on a bottle of champagne while, inflation's this high and I can get, I don't know, Schramsberger, I can get the Roedre from Roedre State Wine, and they're going to take those wines." And I think the problem with that is that the champagne model is based on the entry level. It's not based on the top model. So for everybody in the region to continue to live, something will have to give, like you say. And at the moment, I'm not sure what that's going to be, but
Well, and that's exactly the point. I mean, let's face it, there's a whole lot more people who would buy less expensive champagne
Mhm,
than can afford than, Tête de Cuvée. I mean, it's a much smaller niche market. And you're right, they do subsidize. I mean, it's just like the big motor companies,
mhm,
the Ford, Mustang, whatever, Mach 3 helps pay for the Fiesta at the other end, so to speak. But, at the end of the day, if the model for champagne is going to continue moving basically towards prestige, and if the champagne are willing to say, okay, we're just not going to worry about the normal consumer anymore, even though that's our whole mantra. Champagne is every day. It's for everything. It's not just for celebrations. Well, if your customer base is effectively, rich people, because
mhm.
kind of moving in that direction, at least that's my premise that I kind of put forth in some of my Substack stuff and what we've been talking about. Um, well, then they're basically writing off a huge
Mm,
number of people that might enjoy drinking it if it were affordable. And at the current rate of inflation, at the current rate of costs of production, but I think to a great degree, a lot of it's just the simple concept of how you're marketing
mhm.
things. There's a disconnect, and that disconnect has comes down into the pricing structure for what most people can afford.
But I think it's also maybe we'll finish on this is that champagne has this image or this notion itself, this idea of itself that it's so much better than everything else. So when you ask why, no, it's champagne, it's better. This is literally, if you dare to say something else here, people will tell you, no, no, it's champagne. This is it. But they don't necessarily think about the average consumer that has tasted multiple things. Obviously, if you stay in Champagne, you were talking about everyday drink. Here in Champagne is everyday drink. Okay, for some people, because everybody knows somebody that has bottles in the cooperative. That it's a mix. It's a bit like this, which I think is the same that if you are in Napa, you're going to be drinking a lot of Napa wine. If you produce Napa. When I was in Marlborough, that's what we drank, Marlborough wine. Okay, it was rare to drink something from another region in New Zealand, and never mind something from another country. So I think that is also this thing. And obviously, if you say we are the king of wines, so the king of all wines, but especially of sparkling wine, that means we need to be above the rest. So one of the easiest ways to do that is by setting yourself apart at a higher price point. Like I said, I think today the houses, which today aren't the most expensive champagnes, but I think they do not have that much margin at the moment to come down, because the bottles that are going to come into the market were very expensive to produce. And I'm quoting here or citing Chatillon, because that's literally what he said. But you must remember, they did a lot of sorting at tank level. That means they pay twice for grapes. Okay. And at the grape price that you saw, this becomes expensive very quickly.
Yeah. Well,
and then interest rates have gone up.
Yeah. Yeah. But just to come back to the other thing that I did when I was at Roederer last March, I was talking with the guy I was with.
Jean-Baptiste?
Jean-Baptiste came in and said hi, but this was a guy who was like director of sales, director of PR and stuff. But he's worked there a while.
Olivier Kahn, maybe, yes.
Yeah, what I was trying to get to is that I asked the question because we were tasting Roederer, and he also brought out for comparison the Roederer Estate and the Roederer Estate Hermitage, which is their Cristal equivalent. Yeah. It is superior for sure. Yes. But but the one thing that never came up, the person never said that Roederer is better. He said, we look at these two as different. And that we would never say this, Roederer Champagne is better, except in perhaps the sense of historical or just by virtue of our land, etc., maybe has advantages. But they never actually said the word champagne is better because it's champagne. And so that's where there's, direct comparisons. And I think, I remember in the original days when Argyle, which was started by Bollinger as a partner, and Brian Crozer, not Roland Souls. Roland was working for Brian, but Brian Crozer started it with Bollinger because they were in partnership. Their whole attitude was, well, we're not saying that that Bollinger is necessarily better than Argyle. What we're saying is Argyle is Argyle. It's Oregon. We want to make the best sparkling wine, and we're going to price it in comparison to that, not to champagne. And I think that's a positive thing to say. It's also a recognition that, we're comparing some slightly apples and oranges. The fact is, though, I think right now people preferring the apples maybe to the oranges in terms of cost.
Maybe. I think, you spoke about Prosecco before. Prosecco has a completely different flavor profile because it's made completely differently. I have never, fallen in love with Prosecco. I don't like Glera, okay? It's like I don't like Gewürztraminer, I don't like Glera. So, and I taste it and I just, I know that
No, I
there's some better made and
with
less
you.
made, but it's just this thing. But I do believe that the idea here, here people will tell you, people that have never tasted any other sparkling wine but champagne. Maybe they've had once a d'Alsace or a Crémant de Loire, but in general, they've never tasted anything else. They will tell you that champagne is better. It's not champagne. We can taste it's not champagne. Not necessarily. And I'm not telling them, I said, but what is champagne? What is the essence of champagne? Because you have so many different wines.
Yes.
How do you define champagne? If you say this is champagne, you need to know what exactly is it. And it's quite interesting. The CIVC was doing an exercise like this, and they're also looking into the desirability, by the way. And they actually said that there are many champagnes, and it's very difficult to say where one champagne is, and it's very difficult to say that the qualities that people say that champagne have, other sparkling wines may have those same qualities as well. So it gets a little bit confusing. But I think historically, because it was champagne became the king of wines only because the kings were coronated here in Reims, and they were only coronated here in Reims because we were closer to Paris, to Versailles, than Burgundy, for instance, or Chartres. So it was, it was a convenience thing. And then obviously there's a historic reason because Clovis converted to Christianity here in Reims and then ended up by ruling the whole of Europe. So there was this,
Yeah.
this belief that if they did this, but that's the only reason why the wine, which was very average and not very good, I guess, at that time, why it became so important because it was used at the coronations. Then, when they did the sparkling wine, they continued with this and they, up till I don't know, I would say, at least 80s, 90s, they were significantly better than other sparkling wines because they had more experience in
Exactly.
making sparkling wine. The innovations came from there, a lot of different things. But as other regions have invested in sparkling wine, have gone to look what works best with our soil, our weather, how can we best make the best wines we can, like everywhere in the world, it gets dangerous. And champagne really needs to pay attention, in my opinion at least, that it doesn't become like Bordeaux.
There is that. And I think that, I guess at the end of the day, I mean, what I'm looking at, when we're talking about prices and stuff, and consumers, at least here, and again, French may be different, certainly UK folks are different, but I have a feeling that when people drink sparkling wine, they don't really care much about anything except taste. Do I like this? Does it taste good? And, the concept of parsing things out the way we have is, we're jumping up a level of consumer that I don't think most people are at. People just, when they buy wine in general, and it's based on all my years of retail experience, yes, at a certain point you can get people to agree or disagree that I like something better because of where it's from and because I taste there is a difference. And most people originally they just want something that tastes good to them. And so
Mhm.
that's why you say, well, do you like it slightly sweet? Do you like it dry? Et cetera. And you go from there. And most people are going to kind of fall somewhere in the middle. And
Mhm.
this is where Champenoise, and to a certain degree, may have lost the thread over the last few years. And some of that is reflected in, other issues besides price. But yeah, Champagne has been for 500 years, 600 years before it became sparkling. It had to go sparkling to make something that was decent to drink because of the
Possible, yeah.
climate way back 300 years. But 600 years ago, when it was warmer there, it was renowned for, table wine, some very good
Yeah.
wines. And so the kings, glommed on. And you're right, of course, it is closer to Paris, which is a wonderful advantage when you're trying to visit.
Well,
So
they did come here. They could have gone. We've got lots of cathedrals not that far away. There's a cathedral. There's a cathedral in Paris, even. Okay, so but they came mainly because, because of Clovis and because of this idea. Because obviously, we want to. Oh, I'm not French, but the French wanted to conquer more. They wanted,
but the
a
Gallo
bigger land like everybody else.
the Gallo-Romans had been making wine there before, much before that, and it became an area that they recognized was pretty good for wine.
Uh-huh.
And so, I mean, there's a long history there. It's just that the shift in style of wine was climatically driven to a great degree,
Mm. Yeah,
and
and
innovations along the way. And but that's how I think Champagne has singled itself out to this day. And to some degree, you can justify some of the pricing, but at this stage in the economic life of our cultures, it's getting harder, from my perspective, to justify this very large difference between champagne, sparkling wine, and other sparkling wines,
Mhm,
which stylistically may be more preferred,
mhm,
and qualitatively, at least at the better levels. I mean,
mhm.
again, Roederer Estate's a good example, but Argyle in Oregon, um, Top Cremant from Alsace, or to take it slightly further hill, if you've ever enjoyed Brundelmayer's Austrian Sekt sparkling wine, which are
Some,
these
oh, I don't know
they're
the Austrian so much,
really,
but
really high quality and, not so different. And but
or
certainly,
even Corpinats because they
well,
age long.
yeah, up to a point, yeah. I'll agree. Having just been in Spain, yeah, there were some very good cava Corpinat, but,
Well,
and
there's a difference. I'm not necessarily all in the cover, but the Corpinat, they've actually um they the quality is significantly higher. And I know when I go to Spain, my brother has a house in Spain. I go to Spain, I don't buy champagne. When we look at sparkling wine, we look, and I drink sparkling wine. We look, we say, let's have Corpinat. Let's have this, and because you see what you can get for the
yes.
price.
Well, and this is my point here anymore in the US, and I think in lots of markets, going back to how we started this whole conversation, um, when people are just thinking about what they like to drink and they find something that's similar, and there are enough similar now,
Hmm.
and the prices are half to a third less, then you have to think about where is the whole thing going from the champagne perspective. And it's a concern I have because, I mean, in one sense, it is a world treasure,
Hmm.
and yet you can,
World heritage. I
well,
know.
and you can price yourself right out of it if you're not careful. So I don't know. It's an interesting problem.
All right. Well, thank you so very much for
Hmm.
this very very interesting conversation. Um, maybe the CIVC should be listening to this. Uh, we should have done it in French at that time.
Oh,
Well, uh,
c'est difficile, mais peut-être.
peut-être, yes. But for me, English is easier as well, even though obviously I speak French.
Yeah.
But
Je parle français pas très bien, so.
uh,
Yeah.
je parle assez bien. My dad was French speaking, so I spoke all my life. So but I don't write that well in French. But I think it's very interesting, and I think it is really food for thought because obviously today, when they're looking at desirability, I think that pricing is part of that desirability.
Yeah.
Flavors, as you were talking about, maybe slightly sweeter wine is part of desirability as well, and then maybe also have something that makes people connect with champagne a bit more like the way they connect with prosecco in a way. So those are maybe good things for the researchers to look at when they look at
True.
desirability.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. It was really lovely talking to you.
Nice to finally see you. And
Me as well. Nice to see you. That's so nice. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your support. Thank you. Bye-bye.
bye.
Bye.